Hello, everyone. Today we're actually going to talk about the importance of human resources in terms of the recruitment, selection, and hiring practices. This is a really important area to develop good skills in, whether you're actually in a administrative position where you make final decisions, or you're in a frontline position where you can provide insight into those decisions, or you're in a leadership position where you coordinate those decisions. This is a really important area to be looking at, and one that builds off of the chapters prior to this in terms of writing your job description based on your job analysis and the importance of that. So, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into the actual hiring practices. And just know that if you actually investigate the number of times somebody needs to be terminated from an organization, there's really only about 3 reasons why that needs to happen. And one of the reasons why that needs to happen is because the due diligence wasn't done in the hiring process. You hired the wrong person, in other words. So it's important to really search and make sure you get the right person for the position. It's much more cost efficient to do that. It doesn't seem that way on the surface, but it is, because one of the reasons you might end up having to fire somebody is because you didn't do a good job in the hiring process. So let's delve into that and see what we can learn. And just a little bit history of what we've looked at this semester, because it's been such a crazy semester and so broken up. You know, we have administrative positions, and that is the focus on it's the function of the industry. It's concerned with the coordination of the finances, the actual task portions of it. And then managers is when the focus is on the function of the industry that's concerned with policy within limits set up by administration. And it performs specific functions within the work setting that promote productivity and organization, but they may not necessarily be engaged in the actual creation of those tasks and the carrying out of those tasks. So you have administrative positions and you have management positions. And just to recap, what is leadership? Does leadership look different for those that are administrators, managers, frontline workers? Why have I built this into the section that has to do with recruitment? And that's because my perspective and my philosophy is, as social workers, whether we're in a management position, whether we're an administrator, whether we're a frontline worker, we're always in a position of leadership. We need to have leadership skills and knowledge that reflect those, so for peers as well as for clients. If you're in a supervisory position, you need to have those leadership skills. And it's much more than having the title and much more than just controlling everything. So leadership is important. And when we get into the hiring practices, leadership becomes even more important. And why is that important? Well, perceptions impact all aspects of human resources. And we're talking about human resources in terms of the human capital that we build in our organizations. Perceptions are important. Perceptions are reality. So, how we perceive things, how our clients perceive, how our future employees perceive our organization, oftentimes becomes the reality for them. So, as we're leaders, we have to really be aware of what those perceptions may be. A little, just a little minor example here is through the university, which is where my most recent administrative experience comes from, and in hiring, we have quite a clunky onboarding process. It has gotten better in the last couple of years as we have become more automated. But when I hire or when I offer the position to a new faculty member, to a new administrative staff person, to an adjunct, I oftentimes found myself apologizing for the onboarding process. It was something I had no control over, But it was something that I also needed to learn so that I could help our future employees be able to navigate it, because it was very clunky, it was very awkward, there was not good communication between all the departments in terms of the HR aspect, the college aspect, the benefits aspect. So what I did in my terms of leadership is I actually learned the process and kind of put together a checklist for me within my department. So when I was able to offer a position to somebody, I would say, okay, this is the process. This is what you're going to do. You're going to receive this email. You're going to have to come to campus at this time. You're going to have to do this. So I pulled the components together to make it a much more smooth process. If you're hiring somebody, you want them to have a perception that your organization, that we have our stuff together, that we know what we're doing, because that's important. You don't want that first impression of coming into the organization to be all clunky and miscommunication and things are missed and they have to do things multiple times. So that's just a small example, but perceptions really impact everything in terms of the human capital we're trying to build, and that is the human resource aspect of it. And from a leadership position, you have to consciously be aware of that. And from a professional position, you have to be aware of that, because we're interacting with collaterals, we're interacting with peers, we're interacting with various community stakeholders, and so we have to carry our leadership bag with us, just like we carry our social work professional bag with us all the time, because that's how we also attract top talent. And that's what we're looking for. Is we're looking for top talent who actually can come in and provide value to our organization and help us move forward. So we're always out there presenting ourselves in a way that's going to create a perception that individuals are going to want to come to work for us. So that's another example of how perceptions impact all aspects of human resources. So it's just very important to really focus on developing the skills that are proactive in this area, so that you don't have to end up being reactive on the other end and firing somebody because you didn't do a good job hiring at the front end. The actual process that will take place in terms of recruiting and hiring new talent for your organization is going to depend upon the structure of your organization. At the university, we're a state public university, therefore we have to follow state rules, and we have very strict procedures for our recruitment, our search process, our selection of candidates, and how that works, because we have to make sure that it's objective, it's fair, it's across the board for everybody who has applied. Everybody has the same level of opportunity. So, depending upon your organization, there could be somewhat of a more informal perspective, or there could be more of a very formal, very structured perspective. So you need to understand that. If you're creating your own organization, you're going to want to put in a process that is fairly structured, because it's going to be important to, again, have that perception that you have your act together. You know what you're doing. It will help you down the road avoid any type of complaints based on EEOC, Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, and to understand the hiring laws and exactly how that needs to happen. So you have to really be aware of that. Go back to your job description that's based from your job analysis. And in the recruitment process, you have to be sure that you post an accurate job description. There has to be a process for reviewing the applicant credentials, verifying that they do have the minimum credentials that are necessary for the job description you have posted. There has to be a way to screen potential employees. Now, again, this goes back to what type of organization you have. At our organization, and the interpretation that we have of the laws and the policies, is when we have a ongoing search for we'll say a faculty member, to hire a new faculty member, we are prohibited from searching that individual on the internet. We cannot Google, we can't Facebook, we can't look at the social media. We are not allowed to do that. If that happens during our search process, it's considered a failed search process. Somebody's violated a policy, and we have to start all over. Now, that has been discussed because you want to do your due diligence and you need to make sure applicants have the credentials and the requirements and also align with what you're doing ethically. And so this is something that's been discussed at different levels within the university system anyway, in terms of how do we know that the individual that we're wanting to select has been honest, forthcoming. There are things that are not going to show up in a background check that's going to cause some ethical dilemmas. One example of that is a few years ago, we interviewed for an assistant professor position, and one of the candidates we interviewed for, she met all the qualifications. It turned out that they were not the candidate that we selected, which down the road we were thankful for, because then we learned that that particular candidate had and was in the process of going before the licensure board for having inappropriate sexual relationships with clients, and it ultimately ended up losing the license that they held. And we would not have known that. That's not something that would have shown up on a background check. So we would not have known that if we had selected that individual to hire. So this is a conversation that's gone on, and trying to put processes in place that will meet legalities, as well as allow you to do your due diligence in your hiring. So you have to think about that. Again, you want to make sure that you select the right employee for the organization, that it's going to be a good match. Otherwise, it's going to create just such headaches down the road. So you have to have recruitment results that will bring in candidates for your organization. With the social work world, what we tell you students all the time and what gets reinforced is the social work world is what I like to say is almost kind of incestuous. We know everybody. We work with everybody. You meet everybody at conferences. Your research overlaps with others. So we have a really good networking opportunity within the profession to be able to recruit employees. And that's what we do for our university, is actually when we know that there's somebody out there who would be a good fit and we have an open position, we invite them to come and apply. This is also another thing to consider when you're in perceptions or everything. Remember that. But it's very important to consider this in terms of diversity and difference and attracting individuals into your organization that bring that diversity and difference. Myself being a white female, what I have to be very careful of is I don't want to influence stacking our department or our college so everybody looks like me. What we know is from human behavior is we tend to gravitate to others who are similar to us, who look like us, who think like us, who align with our values and skills. It's a natural human behavior, but we have to be aware of that whenever we're working in a leadership position, because what we really need is we need people who are different from us. I meet my specifications. I have these skills. I don't need somebody else like me. I need somebody different from me. And unless you're cognizant of that, you just don't inherently do that. You're not comfortable with difference. So that's an area that we have to be aware of. And when we're recruiting through these informal mechanisms, through conferences, through advisory committees, through different professional organizations, we need to look around and we need to look and see who is in our group. Who are we interacting with on a regular basis? Do we need to tap into individuals who come from different backgrounds, different ethnic origins, different religious perspectives, all of that, so that we can then open our pipeline and be able to attract others who are different from us. Dolly Chu, and I mentioned her book in here, she has a really good couple of chapters that deal with human services and hiring difference and diversity. We often complain at the university level, well, we don't get a pool of applicants that provide us that difference and that diversity. Typically, we see white women and white men applying for our positions. So we have to go back and we have to say, why is that? What is the perception? And why is the perception that that's the only results in those are the candidates that we're getting? We're not getting the diversity that we really want and we really need. So we have to back away from that and look at that again. So not only do you have to have a structured legal aspect for your recruiting, selecting, and hiring, but you have to hover over it even taller as a leader and say, how are we attracting our applicants? If we're only posting our job positions in the same traditional legacy postings, Higher Education Chronicle, just the CSWE, whatever that is, then we're missing out on a really large applicant pool that we could bring in. So we have to think out of the box. Where do we need to post our positions that are very different from where we have so that we can recruit the variety that we need to recruit and have a really strong applicant pool and be able to find those best individuals to fit with our corporate culture. In this process that you have, there's the ongoing activities, and you've done your job analysis, you've created your job description, you have it written to the point where it really captures the task and the credentials that are going to be necessary for the position you're recruiting for. You have to look at advertising. I touched on that just a little bit on the last slide. Look at where you need to advertise to get a diverse pool of applicants. You don't want to just advertise in the same old places. And with social media, there's a lot of new ways to be doing that. There's LinkedIn, there is other online social media aspects that may be developed and created by individuals from diverse backgrounds that you can actually advertise on also. So those are some pre-search activities. You have to develop some form of screening mechanism so that when you start getting your applications in, that you can screen them quickly and you know which ones are going to meet the minimum qualifications and need to advance to the next step. You're also going to need to set a date as to when the position ends so you don't constantly have people applying for it and you have a pool from beginning to end that you can begin to work with. You're going to have to determine how you're going to communicate with all the applicants. Say you have 25 in your position, your open position advertisement is ended, you're going to select 10 of those. How are you going to communicate with the other 15 that you're not selecting? You need to have a way to do that. We've touched a little bit on the preliminary screening, some type of tool so that you can actually quickly screen out individuals who do not meet the minimum qualifications. Then you're going to need a secondary screening, and that secondary screening is going to have to look at those who do meet minimum qualifications and have some form of ranking in terms of their knowledge, skills, and experience to be able to weight some over the others. You're going to have a process for interviewing. Do you do a telephone interview and a face-to-face interview? Is a telephone interview one way of screening out and then you do face-to-face with others? Right now we're in the world of Zoom, and that certainly opens up new challenges for interviewing. And I think moving forward, we're going to be using the world of Zoom and we're going to be using electronic means for doing interviews. And so we really have to create an atmosphere. Again, perceptions are everything. So we have to create an atmosphere that's warm and that's engaging and that's honest through a teleconferencing aspect. And then you have to determine your hiring process. How do you offer the position to somebody? How do you get them through the onboarding process? So these are all, again, closely tied together, but need to be determined well in advance of even beginning the job search. So again, the pre-search activities mainly develop your screening tools for you so you can screen, your time frame for the applications being posted, where you're going to be posting it, what the hiring process is. If you're going to be looking at, because we often look at almost 9 months ahead of time, so we're going to begin to look for, in the spring, we're going to begin to look for an assistant professor to fill a position for next fall. So all of that has to be clear, and all that has to be taken into account as you're engaging in your pre-search activities, so that when you start your search, it will be organized and systematic and follow a fair and legal process. The book that I mentioned, I think this is a great book, and I really want to get it put into our required text across our program. The Person You Mean to Be by Dolly Chu. She is a sociologist, and she really has done a lot of research on unconscious bias. And again, I think there's two chapters in here that really deal with human resources and recruitment. Great examples. It's kind of an aha moment. So a great resource to learn how to become that leader and being able to lead in terms of diversity and difference, and recruit those individuals who can bring so much to your organization because of the diversity and the difference that they have. And again, the communication with applicants, how, when, who's going to communicate, what's going to be communicated, who can offer the position, who can state a salary, how is that handled. All of that needs to be established before you begin the search. Again, so there's a systematic way of doing this, and it doesn't get all convoluted, and there's not misinformation provided, because that could really hinder your process, and you may have to start all over again. Same with the preliminary screening. Who does preliminary screening? What are you screening for? Usually it's just the minimum requirements. If there's a degree required, if there's a specific amount of experience required, if there's specific skills required, such as knowledge of Excel or some form of technology. When do you do the pre-screening? Do you do it after the job closes? Is it an ongoing process? How is it done? Is it done based on a pre-screening checklist? Is it only the leader, the administrator who does that? And where is it done? Is it done in a group, or is it just simply done through technology and then shared in that way? So for a secondary screening, what does that mean? That means you now have screened out applicants who don't meet minimum qualifications, and now everybody in the pool does meet minimum qualifications. So there should be some form of a weighting rubric criteria so that you can move the applicants with the most experience and the most desired skills to the top. Again, you may have 10 in the pool who meet minimum qualifications, but you only want to interview 5. So you have to have a way to secondary screen out 5 of those who meet the minimum qualifications but may not rise to the level where you want to interview. So this is the same thing with your preliminary screening. Is there a rubric that you use? Is it just the administrator and manager who does it? Is there a committee who looks at it? How is this done? And all this must be decided ahead of time. And then you get to the hiring process. So you have your perfect candidate. You're so ready to hire them. How is that going to happen? Who's going to reach out, and how are you going to reach out? I honestly encourage that whoever reaches out to that candidate does it via at least telephone or Zoom, and not through email. There needs to be that personal connection, definitely, so you can answer questions, get their feedback. And then once you select the candidate, again, you have to have a way to communicate to the candidates who were not selected. And that needs to be done in a way so that you don't alienate those candidates. You may want them again in the future. It's just that they didn't rise to the level to the one position you had at this point in time. In our human resource process, one of the clunky things, and I actually learned this, nobody told me until it happened, but what happens is if we have a pool of 20 candidates and we're going to select 10 to go through the secondary process, the human resources person, the system, sends an automatic email out to everybody who was not selected for the secondary screening, and it just says that others were more qualified. It's just a very cold email that goes out. I did not know that happened, because that also, there's also when we have to take somebody out of the system, like if there's an adjunct who hasn't taught maybe in a year or so, we have to remove them from the system. We can't just keep them in the pool. And when we do that, it sends them a termination email. And I didn't know that till that happened. So now I know to warn people. We're having to remove you because of training purposes. When we use you in the future, we're going to have to onboard you again, and give them all that information and let them know to expect that email. Otherwise, that's a pretty cold way to figure out you didn't get the job. So you need a process in place that's going to respect everybody who's been in that pool. Again, perceptions are everything, and you don't want to alienate future prospects for future job openings. And this here is just, it's about an hour long, but it's Dolly Chu, and she talks about the strategies to advance diversity and inclusion. Again, she gives some really good examples. She is not one who actually, she's not one who really does a lot of bouncing around and is very engaging. She kind of has a monotone, but the things she says are really wonderful and really amazing. So I encourage you to take some time to listen to this, if not now, in the future. And I also encourage you to really get her book. It's one of the best books I have found that it creates awareness without making the person read it being defensive. It's very easy to see myself in it and say, oh, those are things I absolutely need to change and I need to work on, without feeling defensive or guilty or anything like that, because she talks about how we're all humans and we're all evolving. So it's a very good presentation here, and then it's a very good book. So that is a brief rundown of just some hiring practices and some things to consider based on my experience as well as my education. So I hope you find it helpful, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.